Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com, on Roku, Dwyer Boxing, and Sports News. Also, look us up for Dwyer Sports Betting. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let's just talk about some possible fights in boxing, because boxing right now is really in flux at 140 and 147 pounds. First, let me make a point here. For those of you who watch football, American football, you know that a lot of guys are past their primes by the time they're 30 years old, right? Sure, you always have that outlier, right? That guy, Marcus Allen, who's still a great back well into his 30s. But most running backs, for example, fall off considerably by the time they hit 30 years old, right? You look at some of these guys and, ooh, the burst is just not there. You can tell that the guy has been beaten down by the sport, right? Average careers are just a few years in the National Football League. Well, understand, in boxing, it can be the same way, right? The way things used to be had even some great champs walking away from the sport in their early 30s, right? Marvelous Marvin Hagler is done at 32 years old. Look at Ali's career. You're going to find that Ali was badly faded by the time he was the age Vladimir Klitschko is right now. Now let me say this. Brandon Rios apparently has announced his retirement. Rios is still in his 20s, right? I still consider Rios to have one of the best chins in the sport of boxing, but Rios is really a man without a weight class, isn't he? Don't judge him by his weight at the weigh-in. Judge him by his weight at the start of the fight. According to some reports, he was close to 170 pounds. Right? Understand, 170 would place him 2 pounds over the super middleweight limit. Right? The James DeGale limit. Think about the styles. Brandon Rios on his front foot, coming forward. Not that elusive. When you watch a Brandon Rios fight, punches are landed. He's landing punches. Punches are getting landed on him. Right? Now, we have had at least one NFL player, I believe his name was Chris Henry, diagnosed with CTE, right? Brain injury, in his 20s. Right? I'm telling you, the guys who survive long-term in boxing are great defensive fighters who also take care of their bodies. Look at how soft Brandon Rios' body looked for his recent fight against Timothy Bradley. Understand, Rios made several $100,000 for that bout. According to some reports, about $800,000. Understand, too, that wasn't the first big money fight Brandon Rios has had. If you're Brandon Rios and you know training camps have been hard for you, right? You know making weight has been a struggle. It's not something you enjoy. If you understand that you can no longer force your body into the lighter weight class, and that at the heavier weight class, you're going to be hit with even harder punches, because that's your fight style. You're not defensively gifted, and you're not going to get those reflexes now at 29 years old. Then, in my opinion, the decision to retire is a good one, right? Leave the sport with your health. It's better to leave too early than to leave too late. Right? Let me also point out the obvious. There's never a right time to retire. There's always going to be some young lion on the edge of the forest, questioning your manhood, calling you out. There's always the newer model car. People always start to forget over time. As Roy Jones put it in a song, y'all must have forgot. People start to forget over time how great you were, how great your opposition was. Right? They always think that what's happening today is the best there ever was. Right? So to Brandon Rios, let me tip my hat. I understand another Robert Garcia fighter, Marcos Maidana, apparently may also have decided to hang up his gloves. Understand, Maidana had 2 financially big fights against Floyd Mayweather. Understand, Maidana had other big financial fights. I'm sure we got paid for his fight against El Terrible, Eric Morales. Right? According to social media, Maidana has gained a bunch of weight. Right? Maidana has a babe he loves, and he's on the side of the road enjoying life. Isn't that supposed to be the payoff for boxing? Right? You get the opportunity to enjoy your life. You get the opportunity to spend your money. If you're in your early 30s like Marcos Maidana, you have your health, you have your babe, you have your money. Why not step away? What's the alternative? Being in the ring against professional fighting opponents and getting hit upside the head? Getting up at 5 in the morning to do road work to make sure that the night of the fight you weigh 147 or 154? Right? So look, I applaud guys who get out with their health, with money in the bank, with families they love, with support groups. I'm all for it. Because let me tell you, if you watch the sport long enough, you're going to see some fighters you loved who have slurred speech, who you see them giving an interview, you say, oh, great, I haven't seen Joe Frazier for years. Let me hear what Joe has to say. And then you listen to the interview and then you think to yourself, what did Joe say? Right? I heard the interview. I couldn't tell the man next to me what I heard. Right? Joe Frazier, God bless him, is no longer with us. That's why I'm using him as an example. But just understand, if you watch the sport long enough, you're going to see some guys you loved, some guys you knew were champs, some guys who were masters at certain parts of the game. And you're not going to be able to fully understand what the guy is saying. You're going to think to yourself, whoa, this wasn't how he sounded in his prime. Right? So when a fighter realizes that his fight style is rough and tumble, that he's getting hit with shots, right? That it's do or die in every fight, then I applaud that guy when he realizes, look, I've got to leave the game a little bit earlier than most. I wish Brandon Rios nothing but the best. Of course, let me add, as we have to add in boxing, that this is boxing. And if Brandon Rios were to change his mind, let's just say he wouldn't be the first guy I've heard announce his retirement from the sport who somehow has ended up back in the ring. Aren't there many of us right now wondering about whether Carl Froch and Floyd Mayweather are serious in their retirements? Now let's talk styles and matchups and fans and perception. Right? At first glance, we the fans want to see unification matches, don't we? Right? I don't want to know 4 or 5 different champions at 140. You guys get in the ring together and then tell me who's the last man standing. I want to know who's the best at 140. I want to know who's the best at 147. right? I want to be able to turn on my TV, see a guy, and say, there's the best middleweight in the world, right? I don't want to speculate too long about whether Champ A beats Champ B. It's like, okay, fine. I understand it takes time for guys to negotiate a fight. But it gets a bit ridiculous when it's like Mayweather, Pacquiao, and you're there for years going, gee, I wonder who would win between the two of them. It's like, okay, that's okay for year one. By the time you get to year 4 or 5, a lot of people are going to say, come on, man. You know, this is ridiculous. Right? So I get that the public wants unification matches. But let me say this. We, the public, will overlook the lack of a unification match if the fighter is challenging himself in other weight classes. In fact, we'll reward a guy who actually challenges himself in other weight classes. So the challenge to fighters and promoters is to pick the styles of elite fighters that their fighter would do well against. So, let's look at Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford is calling out Manny Pacquiao. As I've mentioned in an earlier video, I think Crawford would have problems with Pacquiao, right? Because Crawford is the guy with the well-constructed game, right? He's a switch. Southpaw, lefty. Southpaw orthodox, right? Inside, outside. Crawford can change his game, change his strategy, depending on what his opponent's doing. To me, that's like the batter who knows that he's going to go to the opposite field on certain pitches and stuff like that, and then goes up against a guy throwing 101 miles an hour and doesn't have time to think. I think a Pacquiao fight's dangerous for him. Well, now we have a guy who wants to make a name for himself, right? He's relatively new in the public consciousness, right? Victor Postol. Understand that Postol is also fast. And where Pacquiao is fast in a way that looks explosive. In other words, you're watching a Manny Pacquiao fight, Pacquiao's over here, then he steps forward, suddenly Shane Mosley's down. And you're saying, what, did Shane get hit with a punch? I mean, you actually have to look at the replay to see the punch. Right? Pacquiao is that explosive. Guys are in front of him, then suddenly the guy's on the floor and you're like, whoa, what happened? Postol's different. Postol, from a legacy standpoint, might be even more dangerous than Pacquiao. Because with Pacquiao, I can tell from the replay that the guy's been hit with a truck. Right? That the guy's been blown out. Right? First round. First Pacquiao-Marquez fight. Right? Marquez goes down 3 times in that first round, and man, it's like you see the punches. Right? Marquez looks like he's been hit by a car on the canvas. Right? That's Manny Pacquiao. Postol. Hand speed. But he's smooth looking. Right? It's not an explosion. It's not a firecracker. No, the guy's in front of you and he's just looking smooth. He's just throwing punches. The hands move fast. You notice the guy's quick. Right? Opponents look like they're getting knocked out by smoothness. Right? When Postol stops you, you look really bad because you don't look like you were surprised like you do against Manny Pacquiao. Rather, you look like you've been outclassed. Now, if I'm Terence Crawford, right, recognizing that Pacquiao and Postol are fast, right, that might not give me time to play the chess game that I prefer. Also, Crawford needs to realize that while Yorkis Gamboa was fast, Yorkis Gamboa wasn't much of a chess player. Right? So if I'm Crawford, and I know this runs against the grain, who cares about the grain? If I'm Crawford and his promoter, I'm thinking, whoa, how can I keep this great fighter in the public imagination, fighting high-quality opponents, world-class opponents, who aren't going to bring the kind of speed that Pacquiao and Postol are going to bring. That's why if I were Terence Crawford, I'd be thinking about fighting unbeaten Danny Garcia. The fight would be a battle of unbeatens, folks. Danny Garcia is a mid-range hooker. Right? Big punch. But understand, Danny Garcia is going to be around the chessboard. Right? If I'm Terence Crawford, what's going to give me a bigger reputation? Beating Victor Postol, a guy who those of us who watch the sport know is dangerous, but who isn't that popular. Or beating Danny Garcia. Another guy I think about if I'm Terence Crawford is Keith Thurman. Thurman's a big puncher, no doubt about it. But Thurman has had some problems with boxers. Thurman's also unbeaten. Right? If you're Crawford's promoter, by the way, I think Thurman's making a mistake by fighting Sean Porter. Dangerous opponent. Well, if you're the manager or if you're the promoter for Terence Crawford, right, you might want to tell him, hey, player, unification, why? Let's take out Danny Garcia. Let's take out Keith Thurman. Understand, the fans screaming for unification match will be silenced if Crawford takes on guys in a heavier weight class. Right? Just think it through. Who are unbeaten? It's hard to say a guy is dodging anyone when he's facing world-class unbeaten fighters. Right? Let me say this too. Timothy Bradley wants Manny Pacquiao. There's a history there. There's unfinished business. Right? You think about Ali Fraser and you understand after 2 fights they needed a 3rd fight. Timothy Bradley knows that he had the worst day of his career in the rematch against Manny Pacquiao. Right? He was injured. He wasn't himself. He threw his strategy out of the window. These guys share the same promoter, Bob Arum. Bob Arum himself is quoted as saying that Bradley, in his last fight, was the best Bradley he has ever seen. Right? The 3rd fight would be tremendous. There's no promotional difficulty that would have to be resolved there. But here, just like I believe Terence Crawford needs to be careful in thinking about fighting either Pacquiao or Postol, I think the person who needs to be careful in the Timothy Bradley-Manny Pacquiao match would have to be Manny Pacquiao. Right? I know YouTube Nation believes that Manny Pacquiao won the 1st fight against Timothy Bradley. All right. What I want all of us to do is to just look at the problems in that 1st fight. Whoever you thought won the fight, just look at the problems in that 1st fight that Bradley's jab is causing Manny Pacquiao. What I want people to do too is to look at the ending of that fight, the last 3 rounds. A calling card for Manny Pacquiao has been his incredible stamina. There aren't a lot of fights where an opponent is the one winning the rounds at the end of the fight. That's exactly what happened the first time these two guys fought. Right? Now you have, by the way, that remains the only loss on Timothy Bradley's resume. I know there's a draw, the Diego Chavez ridiculousness that most at ringside thought Bradley clearly won. Okay, fine. The only fight Bradley's officially lost is the rematch to Manny Pacquiao. Right? If I'm Manny Pacquiao and I'm looking for one more fight, I have to say I'd be more interested in other opponents other than Timothy Bradley. Right? Because Pacquiao knows, even if Pacquiao himself feels he won the first fight, he knows that in the universe of fighters, Timothy Bradley was more in front of him than Floyd Mayweather was. And he couldn't stop Timothy Bradley. And Bradley was the one who seemed to get better in the later rounds. Let me say this too. Teddy Atlas wants Bradley to fight Floyd Mayweather. Now there, the fighter who needs to think this over, who needs to be careful, is Floyd Mayweather. What I want people to do is think about the last 7 years. Okay? Think about the future Hall of Famers Floyd has fought. I would say two of the most important fights Floyd fought in the last 7 years. Two of the most important were his fight against Manny Pacquiao, the highest grossing fight in history, and his fight against Juan Manuel Marquez. People forget Floyd had been out of the ring. He comes back in the ring. Let me tell you what people are going to think about 20 years from now. There's going to be an ongoing debate on exactly how many of the Manny Pacquiao fights Marquez lost. Right? 20 years from now, Marquez is going to be in the Hall of Fame. Right? Well, understand that Timothy Bradley's also beaten Manny Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez. Nothing would be worse for Floyd Mayweather, a guy with no losses going in, than to fight a guy at 147. In other words, in Floyd's neighborhood. And then to lose that fight, and then to have boxing hardcore types ask the question of who actually was the dominant person at 147 pounds during Floyd's era. Right? All I'm saying is this. If I were Mayweather and I was thinking of a comeback, with Manny Pacquiao, I've been there, I've done that. With many people around Floyd's weight class, even in his late 30s, Floyd is simply too fast for many of them. Right? Timothy Bradley is quick. Timothy Bradley can fight inside. Timothy Bradley, and I know people are going to be upset with this, whereas Manny Pacquiao's more talented. In other words, Manny can hit you harder than Timothy Bradley. Right? Manny Pacquiao has built-in punching power and suddenness. While Manny's more talented, Timothy Bradley's more skilled. Right? Bradley has a jab that actually lands. Right? It's not some placeholder jab that's over here so he can throw a straight left hand. No, Bradley's jab actually lands on you. Right? Bradley can come inside and Bradley can stay inside. Let me say this too about Floyd. As I've said, there's never the right time to retire. Floyd's retired. Tom, Dick, and Harry are trying to call him out. Right? Everyone's saying, I don't think Floyd's retired. Golovkin saying, I don't think Floyd's retired. He's the one fighter I would come down to 154 to fight. Right? If I were Mayweather, I would follow the lead of Lennox Lewis. In fact, if I'm Crawford, I would follow the lead of Lennox Lewis. I would follow the lead of Rocky Marciano. And I would stay retired. Understand, you're never going to silence all of the young lions. Right? Let's say Floyd comes back and says, okay, I've had enough of this Timothy Bradley talk. Understand, if Floyd were to lose that fight, they'd both have one loss. Right? Let's say Floyd comes back and he says, okay, I beat Timothy Bradley, Victor Postol, Terrence Crawford, Manny Pacquiao. They're all going to say, Floyd, what about us? Right? Floyd, I'm here. Pacquiao would be able to say, Floyd, you know I'm box office gold. Think about the money we made together. What's wrong with getting paid? In my opinion, don't open that can of worms. But let me say this. I believe Teddy Atlas is on to something. Not everyone is in a position to claim dominance over a division for a period of time. Right? As controversial as that first Pacquiao-Bradley fight is, and keeping in mind that Bradley also gave Devin Alexander his first loss, that Bradley slugged it out with Ruslan Provodnikov and came away with the win. Right? Given Bradley's resume, understand, he is in a unique position. Let me close by saying this. There's a ghost out there, and it's a young ghost. But this guy really is winning in spectacular fashion. Right? I quite frankly don't know what the young man's top end is. And there's the risk. How good is he? All of these guys, Crawford, Postol, Mayweather, Bradley, right? Pacquiao. All of them need to think long and hard before considering Errol Spence. Understand, I think it's a myth that deserving fighters always get an opportunity. They don't. If you're toward the end of your career, like Manny Pacquiao is, right? Pacquiao said, one more and I'm done. Why would you want to risk that legacy against a young lion who might view the fight as an opportunity to make a statement? Maybe Errol Spence falls apart at 30,000 feet. Maybe he falls apart after liftoff in a championship fight. You've got to be awfully ballsy, if you're the champ, to try to figure that out. Right? So, let me also add too, there's another guy who I think might deconstruct folks. Speed kills. Kell Brook has a share of the title. Right? It's interesting that these guys will call out each other. Nobody's calling out Kell Brook. Right? I believe there's a reason why. And I know they'll make the claim that it has to do with box office. Right? That's the same claim that was made back in the day to avoid fighting Sam Langford. That's always the claim. When you see a guy who's unbeaten, who's dangerous, who you don't want to deal with. Right? Floyd, Bradley, Pacquiao, Terence Crawford, these are international names. Crawford's already fought in the UK. I don't believe there's a venue in the United Kingdom that would not be sold out. That includes Wembley. If, let's say, Manny Pacquiao were to say, look, I want to fight Kell Brook. Understand, Brook is not just fast, he's huge for 147. Right? But keep in mind, the first Carson Jones fight, Kell Brook, forced on his back foot, had some issues. The Sean Porter fight, Kell Brook comes in and figures out how to clinch like Vladimir Klitschko. Opponents now are aware that if they get inside, Kell Brook's strategy is going to be to clinch. How certain are you that if Manny Pacquiao dives inside, Pacquiao would allow himself to get clinched? Right? I'm telling you, if you know a guy's a clincher, there are things you could do to avoid being clinched. I think we're going to see a few of them in this upcoming Klitschko-Tyson Fury fight. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here online. I know I have overlooked some of the names at 147, right? And 140, right? Amir Khan, I'm aware that he would be very dangerous to Floyd Mayweather if Mayweather were to come back, right? At least in my opinion. Lamont Peterson, let's face it, he made Danny Garcia look awfully bad the second half of their fight, right? I'm aware that there are other names out there. Let's just say, let's throw everything open to discussion. Let me hear from you. Understand, though, that these fighters have certain gifts. I view Crawford as being a great chess player, a great craftsman, right? Whether or not he could deal with a guy who can fight as fast as Victor Postol, I think that's an open question. Manny Pacquiao, I think that's an open question, right? I view Mayweather as the top shelf in the sport, but if a guy leaves the ring and mentally checks out, mentally says to himself, I'm retired, you'll be surprised how hard it is for that guy to then get back in the ring. Right? I would encourage people to look up Larry Holmes' comments about how he was retired, he was home, he was happy. He gets talked back into the ring, and he found that he just wasn't himself. Right? Let me say this. I view Keith Thurman as a very powerful puncher, right? Who needs to go flat-footed to knock you out. When he's up on his toes, and he has an up on his toes gear, he doesn't have the same power, right? Errol Spence is a bit of a mystery to me. He looks good, but he looks cautious. I wonder how fast he can fight, right? Danny Garcia, I view him as a mid-range hooker, right? In other words, he does have a straight, he can throw straight punches. I'll agree. In the Eric Morales rematch, he hits him with a straight shot, right? But I believe Danny's at his best when he's able to, be in mid-range and throw power punches, right? Danny's a guy who puts his head down and, will come in with a power shot. Think about the styles. You tell me how you see the styles. Tell me how the styles match up. In my opinion, if I'm Crawford, I stay away from top-end speed right now. I avoid Pacquiao. I avoid Postol. There are other names I can dominate who will get me legacy with the public, right? The public won't view me as dodging other guys if I fight a Danny Garcia or a Keith Thurman. And I think Crawford is more than competitive against both of those opponents. Right? Think it through. If I'm Manny Pacquiao and they offer me the Timothy Bradley fight, I'm looking at the other names on the list. Right? I've been there. I've done that. The public thinks I beat him twice. I would privately know dude was a problem the first time around. Right? That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. Thanks for stopping by.